Trials of the decade, Olympian Oscar Pistorius will tomorrow discover his fate when the judge decides whether he is guilty of the premeditated murder of his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp.
In a world exclusive, we'll speak with Mark Williams-Thomas in just a moment. He's the only journalist who has spent time with Oscar since his arrest. Here's the story so far.
Over the last year, I've spent time in South Africa. I've had unique access to the man known to the world as the Blade Runner.
Until a couple of years ago, few of us had heard of Pistorius until the London Olympics changed all of that. A man now at the centre of the most high-profile murder trial of the decade.
We can confirm that there was a shooting incident this morning at the home of the well-known Paralympic athlete Oscar Pistorius. At this stage we can confirm that a young woman, a 30-year-old woman, did die on the scene of gunshot wounds.
Behind me, in this gated community, Oscar made a decision that left his girlfriend dead and his life in tatters. By the next day, this had become an international story, played out across the world's media.
Pistorius was charged with her murder. My time with Oscar reveals an elite athlete, which means he makes split-second decisions, often reacting to situations on adrenaline. Reeva Steenkamp was a successful model, with her life ahead of her. Nothing will bring Reeva back, and I can only imagine the torment her parents are suffering.
For the last 5 months, Oscar's and Reeva's lives have been examined in minute detail, and in less than 24 hours it will come to a close when the verdicts will be handed down. The judge has to decide if she believes Oscar and his account that he believed an intruder was in the house, or, as the prosecution claim, that he planned to kill Reeva.
And Mark Williams-Thomas joins us now live on the phone from Pretoria in South Africa. Good morning to you. You're the only journalist to have access to Oscar. How is he feeling?
Yeah, good morning. Well, he's obviously devastated. I think it's very important to set out the context is that Oscar admits to having shot, and obviously as a result of that Reeva died, but he's also very clear in that he treated as a tragic accident. He didn't intend to, he believed someone was in the house, and having spent time with him and spoken to him in some real detail, not just him but his family, the evidence and what I've talked to him about, I do believe also that it is a tragic accident.
Well, that obviously is your personal opinion, and the judge will decide later. But do you feel comfortable being in the company of a man who could be convicted as a brutal murderer?
Well, absolutely. I feel comfortable talking to anybody. I've talked to Oscar. I've seen him obviously away from everybody else, and I think the big difference is that everybody else is judging on seeing him in a court fashion and not away from that in his normal family environment. I've had unique access, the only person in the world who's been able to do that. So I've seen him in a very different environment. And he is a broken man. He made it very clear to me that actually whatever the punishment that it comes down to him tomorrow, nothing will bring Reeva back. His love for her is unvetted. He still loves her dearly. And he wished, obviously, that circumstances were different. But he says no punishment will be anywhere near the punishment that he had for himself, because he's lost someone he was in love with. And let's remember, he was only going out with her for 3 months. So they were still very much in a courting relationship.
Mark, what is expected to happen tomorrow?
Well, the process, of course, for the judge is the judge has to, or will come back with a decision in respect of the first charge, which is that of premeditated murder, which is what the prosecution have charged him with. So she has to decide if he intended to kill her. The options for her, obviously, guilty or not guilty. If it's a not guilty, then she has the lesser charge of murder, which she will then consider with regards to intent. And then if she feels he's not guilty on that, then there is a separate charge of culpable homicide. It's not a charge that's put to him in the initial charge. It's similar to our manslaughter, and she will have to decide whether or not he was reckless in regards to the shooting. And then he has 3 other charges. 2 relate to the discharge of a firearm in public, and then a further charge relating to ammunition. So in total, she's obviously going to consider a number of charges against him, and a range of sentence potentially, if found guilty of premeditated murder, is a minimum of 25 years. If he's found guilty of the discharge of firearm, then that could be a community sentence. But he could still get a community sentence if he's found guilty of culpable homicide.
Well, that decision, of course, will be made tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you then. Mark Williams-Thomas joins us now from Pretoria. He's the only journalist who's had access to Oscar Pistorius during his murder trial. Good morning, Mark. Sorry we had problems with you a little bit earlier. I was talking about a column that you have written in today's Daily Mirror, where you've really stuck your neck out here. You have been spending a lot of time with Oscar, and you say, after getting to know Oscar and his family quite well over the past year and evaluating in depth the prosecution evidence against him, I truly don't believe Oscar did murder her, nor do I think he is guilty of the lesser charge of culpable homicide.
Good morning. Yes, I mean, my background obviously is a former detective. I undertake risk assessments on dangerous offenders, and I've had the opportunity to speak both to Oscar, his family, and consider the evidence. The evidence, of course, being presented in court, the evidence that Oscar talks about, but actually see Oscar in a very different environment. People have seen him in a court environment. I've seen him at home. I've seen him interact with his family. I've spoken to his family about him away from Oscar himself. And it may well be that people consider, you know, I've stuck my neck out. What I've done is I've looked at the evidence, I've presented the evidence in what I consider to be a very clear step-by-step process. And of course, those are my views.
And what has he been like in the time that you've spent with him?
Well, Oscar's a broken man. Let's be very clear here. He killed Reeva Steenkamp. For that, of course, Reeva's never going to come back. The impact on the family is unimaginable. I can't begin to imagine how Reeva feels. But Oscar is absolutely devastated. He's a broken man. He's struggling to sleep. He's in a position where he's got great support as a family. And indeed, we saw Carl this morning. Carl, who's been a great support to him, his brother, who was involved in this very serious car accident about a month ago. He's in court this morning, having come in in a wheelchair.
Well, Oscar arrived this morning. What was the atmosphere like then, and how was he feeling today?
Yeah, I mean, I've covered a lot of high-profile cases over the years, and I have to say the amount of media here, this has gripped worldwide attention. I think particularly because of Oscar's rise to fame around the Olympics. When he arrived here today, there was a real melee. There was an absolute, I mean, the police had to allow him to get into the premises, and you know, cameras from all around the world. This really has hit an international story. But what we must remember here, this is two people's lives. This is the life of Reeva and the life of Oscar and the family. And whilst it's been played out through the media, we mustn't forget that those people and the torment that they're going through now.
Well, although the verdict we're leading to that as we speak, obviously we might not actually find out if Oscar is guilty of murder until tomorrow. So what is the process? What is happening in court today?
Well, what's happened, this is day 42 of the trial. It's the verdicts today. So what's happened is Judge Masipa has come in. She's reading out slowly, going through methodically. So she's checking each witness. There's 37 witnesses. She's considering the evidence that each witness has given, and she's pulling out the key facts that she's considered. Some of the evidence that she's looked at this morning, she's particularly focused on the noise and the sound issues with regards to the witnesses. These are the ones that talk about hearing noises, making phone calls. And very significantly, she's drawn a conclusion that in her mind, that evidence should be treated very carefully. And in fact, we should rely on technological advances, i.e. phone records, which is what she's relied on. She's also talked in terms of the gun pattern, in terms of the shooting, and to look in particular with regards to the premeditated murder charge, is which of course she's really focused on now. They've had a break, they've only just come back in again now, and she's continuing to go through evidence. I think what's very clear with Judge Masipa is that she's taking great care to consider each witness, consider the evidence both from a prosecution and a defence side. And why that's really important is that at the end of this, when she returns her verdicts in relation to the individual charges, it is available for both sides, both the prosecution and the defence, to appeal.
We've been hearing reports that as she's been going through the evidence that she's heard, that Oscar Pistorius has been in tears. Is that true?
Sorry, say that again, Holly?
We've been hearing reports coming back that as the judge has been going through her evidence this morning, that Oscar has been very emotional, that he's even been in tears this morning in court. Is that true?
Well, certainly Oscar was very emotional when he arrived. He certainly looked like he was crying, or he had been crying. And I can tell you from when I met him most recently at the weekend, he was very, very upset. He burst into tears on a number of occasions. He was shaking. This was a huge issue for him. But I think what we have to be clear of is that when I said to Oscar, you know, what do you think about going to prison? You know, Oscar was very clear in terms of the fact, you know, nothing is going to live up to the torment that I'm having to live through. I took Reva's life. I love Reva, and for that I will have to live with it for the rest of my life.
As you said, the judge is going to return verdicts on each of the 4 charges. What are those 4 charges?
So he's been charged with premeditated murder. That is, the prosecution believe that there was an intent, and their evidence is that there was an argument on that evening, and then he went on and shot Reva. Interestingly, the judge this morning has considered the evidence in relation to the argument, and she believes there was no argument in her opinion. So that's the initial charge. Depends on whether, of course, she finds him guilty or not guilty on that. If she finds him not guilty, then they move to a charge of murder. Then exactly the same applies, guilty or not guilty. And then there is this culpable homicide charge, which is most similar to England and Wales of a manslaughter charge. This will be where there's no premeditated intent, but where there may be recklessness involved. She's got to consider that. And then there are 3 other charges. 2 charges relate to the discharge of a firearm, one through the gun of a sunroof in a car, and the second one in a restaurant. Indeed, the second one in the restaurant, the defence lawyer has actually said that he should be found guilty now in relation to that. And then the final charge, which is ammunition. That's possession of ammunition to which Oscar didn't have a permit or didn't have a gun, and therefore its possession was illegal.
And just finally, Mark, we read out a tweet from someone who's had sort of experience in South Africa and said that there seems to be very little interest, or over the past few weeks there's been very little interest over there because there was an assumption of guilt.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk to people, I spoke to people yesterday in South Africa, speaking to a number of different individuals, and there certainly was a very strong view that the evidence was very strong, it was very overwhelming, and that he should be found guilty. It's always very difficult because, of course, you're talking to not a wider sample, you're just talking to a number of individuals, and of course there are people out there who think otherwise. I think what's very clear from the judgment and from what Judge Masipa is going through is that perhaps it's not entirely as clear-cut as some people have seen, and she's challenging some of that evidence. And indeed, from my article that I've written this morning, you know, I challenge some of those particular issues with regards to fear in South Africa, which is a real fear. It's not just a fear; it's a reality in terms of fear.
We'll have to. We'll have to jump in there, unfortunately, Mark. We have the news. We'll continue this, obviously, because the ITV News.
Not guilty of murder, but guilty of culpable homicide or manslaughter in our terms, in what has been the biggest murder trial of this decade.
How do you feel? Yesterday, Paralympian Oscar Pistorius was cleared of murder. Judge Thokozile Masipa delivered the quick verdict on 2 counts.
The accused, therefore, cannot be found guilty of murder dolus eventualis. That, however, is not the end of the matter, as culpable homicide is a competent verdict.
Pistorius sobbed in the dock. Then a surprise adjournment, leaving the world's press waiting. Until today.
He is found guilty of culpable homicide.
OK, Mark Williams-Thomas, he is there for the latest for us in Pretoria, South Africa. So court has adjourned. What are we waiting on, Mark?
Well, after 43 days of court, we're now in a position where final verdicts have been announced. Those 4 separate charges, the first charge related to a murder charge. The Judge Masipa said that there wasn't enough evidence for that. It was very circumstantial, and in fact she was very critical of a number of the state witnesses. So he found not guilty in relation to murder. The drop-down charge, which is the equivalent of a manslaughter charge, a culpable homicide, she has found him guilty of that. And then the other 3 charges, 2 of which relate to the discharge of a firearm. One of those relates to count 2, which is the discharge of a firearm through a sunroof. She found him not guilty in relation to that. Count 3 related to the discharge of a firearm in a restaurant in 2013. She found him guilty in relation to that.
And the final count, count 4, related to the possession of ammunition in an illegal manner. She found him not guilty of that. So those verdicts have now been passed. It's now a matter for both the prosecution and the defence to provide their information as to why bail should be granted. It now moves into a different position because whilst bail was granted before, he's now been convicted, so they have to start again. The judge has listened to the arguments on both sides. She's now adjourned for another hour when she will return her consideration in respect of bail.
Okay, now bail is all important. The reason why bail is all important before sentencing is the condition that this man is in, what sort of individual he is. We're finding out more and more about his weaknesses throughout the whole case. But you, Mark, you have actually been with him. You spent the day with him. What state of mind is this man in? What sort of individual is he?
Yeah, I mean, Oscar is an extremely damaged man. I think it's very important to set out that Oscar says whatever the punishment is, nothing will live up to the punishment that he himself is suffering. He clearly loved Reva, he's made that very clear, and I've seen him in an environment away from court. Everybody else, of course, has seen him in a court environment where he's given his evidence in the box. I've seen him with his family and spoken to him, and I believe that he was genuinely in love with her. I believe that it was a tragic accident, and as a result of that, whatever the outcome is today, and the options are very varied. Once bail has been dealt with, there will be an issue of adjournment for sentencing. Sentencing may be anything between 2 to 4 weeks, and when they come back, it will be both for the defence and the prosecution to provide witnesses. It's almost a mini trial within a trial where they will then give consideration to sentencing. And the judge's options are really wide and open. She could go for a community sentence, or she could go for a term of imprisonment, a custodial sentence.
Mark, how could it be? I mean, we're just sitting here talking and reflecting. You just said it was a tragic accident. You look at social media, you hear reaction from people, and people just do not understand what is accidental. Maybe accidental in killing Reva Steenkamp, but when you fire that amount of shots into a small cubicle, you mean to hit someone. If you wanted to scare someone, you would fire into the air, you would call for help, which the judge pointed out. But to discharge a weapon with dum-dum bullets through a small door like that, people are finding it very hard to comprehend that this is a tragic accident.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point being, for the starting point, obviously was the case of murder. Was this premeditated, or was there an intent to kill Reva Steenkamp? The judge has very clearly felt that that isn't the case. The evidence wasn't made out by the state. And she says that she believes Oscar's account. There's no reason to disbelieve him. And in terms of the fact that his evidence that he's given, she was critical of that. She said his evidence was quite poor at times. It was contradictory at times. But it is very much for the state to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. That is why it then dropped down to the culpable homicide aspect. And in her views, she felt that he was negligent. She felt that he could have made some contact before he moved into the room. For example, he could have made an emergency call. And as a result of that, that's why she believes there was negligence. Of course, Oscar's evidence is that the gun went off by accident, and the result of that was 4 shots. The judge made issue of that and said, well, why 4, not 1 shot? So she has drawn some aspects with regards to the reasons that he committed the offence, and of course it's not in doubt. He killed Reva. That's not in doubt. What is in doubt is whether or not he believed that there was an intruder in the house.
And Mark, how long do we think the sentence could be or might be for culpable homicide? And what was Pistorius' reaction to that guilty verdict? Well,
Pistorius this morning was very clear. Although he's left almost in a cliffhanger, it was a very bizarre steps that the judge took not to announce a clear decision in respect of the culpable homicide. Although watching the trial, it was clear that that was the way she was going to go with a guilty verdict. He has resigned himself to the fact that I think that the culpable homicide verdict was going to be there. The biggest concern was with regards to the ammunition, because that carries a long, lengthy sentence. His sentence now will be a decision for the judge in 2 to 4 weeks' time, once she's heard evidence both from the defence and from the prosecution. And some of that evidence from the prosecution may well be some new elements that are introduced. It has caused a lot of debate
in South Africa here. There's a lot of people out here who are very angry that the verdict has come back, and indeed I've heard this morning that there has been some influence, or certainly some unhappy feelings at a very, very senior ministerial level with regards to the verdict, and that causes serious questions out of the independence of the criminal justice system. So I think we've got a long way to go still in terms of sentencing, and ultimately there are people out there that feel that he should receive a custodial sentence.
All very interesting.
Mark,
look, I know court's going to reconvene around 11:30 or so our time. Anything to report to us, we'll be back to you, OK? Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and lots of comments coming in from you. As you said, mixed reaction to that verdict. Fliss Sutton, she says, whatever the sentence, it won't be long enough. It should be life for a life. Jill Sullivan, the correct verdict without a doubt. My heart goes out to Reeva's brave, strong family. And Nikki Sadler, a young, beautiful woman died and a family lost their daughter. We mustn't forget that. Thank you for those. Keep your comments coming.
OK, look, that's the big story of today.